Good morning, everybody. I'm really looking forward to this. So Andries and I, who manage these monthly sessions, we're putting heads together of what we could do this time, and we thought the best thing we could possibly do is to get the best possible people we could think of to join Andries and myself in order to discuss what next. What should the next commission do? How are we going to get to 2030? All the issues that are really on our table now. And we're lucky enough to get some of the best speakers we could possibly think of. First of all, ex-commissioner Miguel Arias Cañete has very kindly agreed to join us from Jerez in Spain, I guess. Miguel?
You guys right.
Excellent. Okay. Klaus Dieter from who's the former Deputy Director General of Energy, who's kindly agreed to join us from sunny Brussels, I guess, Klaus Dieter.
It's true, without sun, yeah.
Excellent. And we have Andries Piebalgs, former Energy Commissioner and Professor at the FSR, who's joining us from a snowy Latvia, I guess, Andries.
Oh, snow has melted. I need to disappoint you.
Okay.
Hello.
And myself, also a part-time professor at the Florence School of Regulation and former Deputy Director General. And the most important, our compare for today, Katerina Sikov, the Director of Internal Markets, Renewables, all the stuff that matters in the energy sector. And the star of the commission, who's very, very kindly agreed to come and ask us the questions. So thank you, everybody, and really looking forward to this. Katerina has carte blanche to ask any questions, and she'd be very kind enough to say that at the end of it, she will make a summary of her takeaways from the incoherent ramblings of the ex-commissioners and ex-director generals. So thank you very much, Katerina, very much indeed for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Many thanks, Chris, and good morning, everybody, and good morning, the very prominent panel that I'm expected to moderate today. I must say that I feel actually very intimidated having two of my former commissioners in the panel and two of my former directors generals on the panel. So I hope the audience understands in what delicate position I am here, but really a pleasure to see all of you and be with you here today. I was also asked to invite the audience to write questions they may have in the chat box. So please do that during the discussion. I will try to monitor those and to see what I could then bring into the discussion there. You have also seen that we intend to tackle a number of issues related to the future, be it the short-term future, so 2030, or the longer-term future, 2040 framework, in getting the EU to a decarbonized net zero 2050 economy. So we thought that we'll structure the discussion around 4 broader questions that encompass the more detailed questions, and the panelists are then free to choose the angle they want to come to the question. We will then spend 15-20 minutes on each of these questions before we close in 1.5 hours. So, and the first question I thought we could focus on is looking at the 2040 framework, which is in a way 2 investment cycles from here. How do we get there, and how do we get there via 2030? So looking at both of these time horizons. What Commission should do? Do we need to come up with more targets, new legislation, renewables targets or not? I think there are many open questions here, and I'm really keen to hear what our panelists will tell us on this, or what questions they may want to raise for the next Commission to think of. So maybe I invite Mr. Arias Cañete first.
So far, so good. Thank you. Well, I will start by saying that fixing a 2040 target is not an option; it's an obligation which is established in the European climate law, and it was to be fulfilled within 6 months of the first global stocktake referred to in the Article 14 of the Paris Agreement. So the Commission was obliged to open this debate on 2040. But I will start another way. So I would like first to stress that the actual at least 55 emission reduction target by 2030 compared with 1990 is already a very ambitious one. And achieving it would require the full implementation of the whole actual climate and energy regulations in a permanent updating of the national integrated energy and climate plans. My second remark is that we must be conscious of what is the present situation. In 2022, the net emissions reduction of greenhouse gases was expected in the European Union to be 32.5 below the 1990 level. And that means that achieving the 55 reduction target would need an acceleration of the pace of emission reductions, and the Climate Progress Report for 2023 indicates so, to almost triplicate the average annual reduction achieved under the last decade. And it's very peculiar that also in this panorama of real difficulty for 55 target, that the Commission communication of the 6th of February, Securing Our Future, and also its impact assessment, they confirm that the resulting, which is surprising, net emissions under an unchanged policy framework would account to minus 88% in 2040 compared to 1990. So, if it is true, the full extension of current energy and climate policies towards 2040 should become a top priority.
Thank you. So you referred to the 2040 framework and the impact assessment that indeed we did in that context, requiring quite a considerable CO2 or carbon reduction by 2030, and then even more so by 2050. Maybe I then turn to Christopher. So how do you see this path there taking place? How can we get there in terms of the policy framework?
Thanks, Katarina. I must say, I'm like Miguel, I'm a little worried about where we stand. Because also, as Miguel said, it's not a question of if we have to achieve these targets, it's how we have to achieve these targets. And I always remember, I can't remember whether it was Andres or Miguel who said it to us once when I was in the Commission. And that was, you know, the thing about, if Europe doesn't do this, if not us, then who? Who will demonstrate that climate change can be addressed properly in a way that benefits society? If not us, then who? So not doing it is really not an option. But, you know, again, as Miguel says, we're not on track to do this, and this is really worrying. Even up to 2030, let alone 2040, because we've got the 2040 targets, which will, whether it's 75, 80 or 90, it's incredibly challenging. And there's a number of real challenges, isn't there? So, I mean, first of all, we're not on target for renewable electricity. And it's going to get really hard over the next, or renewable energy, sorry. And renewable electricity is going to get really tricky over the next 6 years. I mean, we're already seeing in Spain, Germany, and some other countries that the grid constraints are preventing new investment. And the amount of curtailment that you have in Germany is already worrying. In Spain, Miguel, I think I'm correct in saying that there's now a huge level of congestion, particularly in the distribution grid. I learned something really, really interesting, which is in Spain, and I'm sure it's the same in other countries, that when we had the financial crisis, Spain put an obligation on distribution companies not to invest more quickly than the speed of GDP growth, which makes it impossible then for them to invest as fast as needed in order to actually enable capacity. So basically, you can't build new renewables in Spain, if I understand correctly. And so there's huge challenges there that really need to address. Buildings, I'm really challenged how we're going to do buildings, and perhaps this is worth a discussion of what could be done on buildings, because we know, I always do this whenever I have a discussion, whenever I leave a discussion on greenhouse gas and all the rest, I look at the buildings as I drive home and think all of those have got to be decarbonized, completely decarbonized in 26 years. And then I think, I know what I was doing 26 years ago today, and it's gone in a flash. That's no time at all. And the systemic change you need in order to do it is crazy, absolutely crazy. And we don't have a policy that's going to get us there. Transport, I think what the Commission has done in this Commission is absolutely brilliant, because you brought transport, all forms of transport into the ETS. You've got the refuel maritime, refuel aviation. And so I'd say that's pretty much on track. Transport, we can see how to do that. So in a way, you can see how to do electricity. You can see how to do transport. Okay, there's some challenges. But then there's buildings and industry. And, perhaps we can talk about the ETS and the CBAM. But I don't get how we're going to decarbonize industry and still have an energy-intensive industry. I think there's a fundamental challenge there, notwithstanding the CBAM, of which obviously we need to talk about carbon capture and storage. So those are the challenges I see. So, and I think there's also a little problem that in terms of buildings and industry, the EU has a little bit done fairy dust energy and climate policy, hoping that set some targets and hoping that things will be solved. And we're now finding the answer is no, well, no, they won't. That industry will not be decarbonized on this speed, and neither will buildings. And I say fairy dust policy is that we've been focusing on certain technologies for political reasons, so renewable hydrogen. We haven't had a technology neutral approach. So I think we need to actually really rethink what we've done and draw a line for each of these things: grids, electricity, buildings, transport, industry, and then really plot a course to say, okay, what is really going to need to be done between up to 2030, 2040 and 2050? And then ask the question, okay, how can we do that and still have high standards of living in an industry? And then be transparent about it and start making some hard decisions in this respect. So until now, in a way, the Commission's been very logically reticent to do this on the grounds of subsidiarity. So, for example, it hasn't intervened in distribution grids to say, member states, you've got to do this. But I think we now, over the next Commission, although it's really tricky, we have to kind of say, okay, you can do it one way or the other. You can either say subsidiarity in member states, here are the targets, member states, off you go. Or we can be a lot more prescriptive and say, this is really what needs to be happening. So I'll leave it there, Kathleen.
Thanks, Chris. You raised quite a number of challenges. Indeed, and I think some of those we will try to tackle in the rest of our discussion here. You also mentioned the political situation, political context where we are today after the election of the European Parliament, where some people say that brings further challenges to what the ones that you already raised. So here I would like to hear from Andris. How do you see the political context in the EU with the new composition of the European Parliament? Is this a blessing or is it a challenge for us?
No, I would say it's definitely a challenge, because political shift now that happens perhaps does not put under the question what has been done until now. So I would not to describe the situation as dramatic, but at the same time, it is confusing situation, because we know that a lot of implementation work is on the level of member states, by state aids, by vigorous implementation of regulations they have agreed themselves. So it is a worrying trend. I believe that what needs to be done, it's really a bit of like a stock taking. Green Deal is extremely broad area. And for me, I believe that there would be very clear need to focus on climate change, because climate change is so much accelerating and providing so much challenge even inside the EU and clearly outside, that you need to specify that we focus very much achieving this net zero. So there are some issues that are as important, due diligence directive, but let's focus on issue like it is climate change, because I believe that European has made a lot of shift in my opinion, and I believe that it's very few people, but they are in politics as well, that say there is no climate change. It is just some spike. So I think this is very clear minority, at least in Latvian elections, it did not fly. So, and we don't feel the perverse situation coming from climate change. I believe that I think is important both in Parliament and also in the Council to discuss this general situation, what we try to achieve in this diverged situation of political opinions. Because I still believe there is controversy that is not so huge what concerns the climate change. The second issue is really to take a bit of stock, because what Europe has lived in the last 5 years is in enormous perturbations. Definitely war that Russia started to Ukraine. It's made enormous perturbation to the EU. And there have been decisions that have been just responding to the crisis. But now, when the situation has been clarified, we clearly see that there need to be some adjustments. First of all, on natural gas, and that definitely makes impact for CCS. I yesterday followed one analysis that basically says that seeing demand pattern this year, gas consumption in EU will increase by 6%, next year by 12%. So natural gas is taking a bit of recovery. At the same time, we have now in the price word for natural gas that is very much related to LNG. And if we see the trends in LNG market, actually prices should go down a bit. So gas will play more roles than we expected during the crisis. So that means that we need to make this type of adjustment. Another thing that is quite remarkable, that we don't consume more electricity, because everybody was expecting that electricity demand will grow because it's very much related to decarbonization. I would say we would need to look what are the reasons. Is it we slow in changing, or there have been some adjustments of consumers that is definitely influencing it, and some of transition pathway like for hydrogen, it will be less difficult. And then we should also to look on some objectives that do perhaps more harms than goods. Is 10 million tons by 2030 by domestic production of hydrogen, 10 million tons of import. Should be done adjustment because it was done in a situation that was completely different, where we did not matter, we have not been masters of the situation. So I believe that scoping what we have now matters from many points of view, because we have lived through extremely difficult period and we are out of it, in my opinion, and also for the future, for 2030, 2040. And last but not least, we will have National Energy and Climate Plan South. It's a moment of truth. So that definitely gives whatever member states have in their mind. And if it does not add up, I believe we need to go out of the comfort zone and continue just the discussion with member states, but really see what structural measures could be taken in addition that we have now, because we will see definitely some issues that is not flying. And why it is not flying? Because each member state does not see this as important, but for EU as a whole, it matters a lot. So that means this European dimension could be brought in some areas more stronger than it is now. So I believe this political situation is very serious, but it could be addressed, because I don't feel that we are deviating away from the target to achieve climate neutrality. So at least my political feeling says it's not the case. There are some issues that are controversial, but they go beyond narrow agenda of climate change.
Katarina, can I just add to what Andres said about the National Energy and Climate Plans, that the National Energy and Climate Plans are sufficient and believable, or convincing in terms of not just the targets, but the actual measures that the member states say, this is how we're going to achieve them?
Yeah, I mean, of course, the national climate plans are assessed in two respects. One is the target achievement, and then the other one is exactly to see what are the measures that member states intend to put in place in order to achieve the target they have set there. So this assessment is now being finalized. And I actually wanted then to ask Klaus-Dieter here on what would you suggest the Commission to do if now when we get the national plans, if we do the mathematics and we calculate that we are not going to reach, for instance, the 42.5% by 2030 that has been agreed, which then calls the Commission to come up with further measures. How would you advise us to take it from there? Also keeping in mind that European industrial competitiveness is on the top of the political agenda, and jobs and growth obviously underpinning this.
Before I look what the Commission should do with regard to the National Energy and Climate Plans, I would like to pick up on what my three colleagues have said before, because what they said is very important, and I share everything what Miguel, Christopher, and Andres has said. But I think what I would like to stress here is what I see in this respect for the Commission to be done. And in the first place, what Miguel pointed out, and also Christopher, is the implementation of the measures that have been adopted under the Fit for 55. And this, in my view, has to come even before going into new legislative initiatives. So one has to concentrate on the implementation. And here I think the Commission has to install a kind of a comprehensive strategy for scrutinizing how member states are doing it. And one possibility to do that could be to create a platform where the Commission installs some key indicators which would allow a regular monitoring and measuring of the progress with regard to the transition, to the competitiveness of the industry, and also the level of investment in key sectors. Because these are the three key components that we need to monitor. And if they are not delivering what is needed for the 2030 targets and further on for the 2040 targets, then corrective measures have to be taken. So that's for the implementation. And then, and this is something which is very close to my heart, and it has been lost a bit in the discussion on moving forward also the energy system in Europe. And that is, I would say it's moving away from pushing individual technologies and working on an integrated European energy system. For you, Katharina, it sounds familiar because we were working on that already back in real European integrated energy system. We need a systemic approach, not a technology-specific approach. What we see, what the Commission or the EU, I would say in this sense, have done so far, they started off with full electrification. Then it was clear that full electrification will not work. So one added hydrogen, renewable hydrogen. But then one also had to accept that will not make the trick. So the next component that was added is now carbon capture and storage. But this is not the way to do it. I think we should lean back and think about how or what do we need or what are the cornerstones of a fully integrated energy system. And the first element is technology neutrality. We need to respect the principle of technology neutrality by accepting all zero and low carbon energy sources and technologies needed to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions and letting the market decide on the adequacy of the technologies. So no technology-related targets, as we have in the 42% of green hydrogen for industry by 2030. And what we need is a carbon emission-based threshold as a key criteria. And this, for me, is the first important thing. And that should be the basis of the integrated energy system. And the other is, I think we have to think about our attitude, whether the energy-only market is really sufficient in order to address the challenges that we have. And here I would advocate for the reflection on two markets that can complement the energy-only market. The first is the capacity market next to the energy market. I mean, we all want and we all need rapid development of renewables. But that means also that we have a decline of dispatchable capacity, which is critical for the balancing of the system. And here, the capacity market, not only a capacity remuneration scheme, a real capacity market to be developed could be a way forward. And the second element, complementary to the energy only and the capacity market, is a real flexibility market. The Commission in the electricity market design reform has already done some steps forward with regard to non-fossil flexibility instruments. But again, this is just bits and pieces. What is really needed is a constructive move forward into real flexibility markets where all the flexibility instruments are also, again, be present at an open level so that member states can choose from what is best placed for their national situation. And last but not least, and here I only want to echo what Chris said, because it becomes a real bottleneck for the energy transition, the industrial competitiveness, and also the European energy security and resilience. And that is the situation around the European electricity grid. I think the Commission did a good move with the European grid strategy that was issued, I think, in November last year. But as Chris has said, it is not sufficient now only to concentrate on the transmission grid. In the new system, and also in the what I call the integrated energy system, the distribution grid will play an even more important role. And it will go both ends. It will not only the distribution to the end consumers, but also from the distribution into the transmission grid. And this is really the charnier for the working of the market. And what we see is that almost in all member states, the distribution grids are in very, very bad shape. Chris has already mentioned Spain. In Germany, the distribution grid has more than 40 years. There has been almost no investment in digitalization, modernization, etc. This has to be done. And here, I would say that the Commission should come forward with a European Grid Strategy 2.0, where the focus will be put exactly on this issue. Chris has mentioned the subsidiarity, but as I said, it is true that until now, the subsidiarity might have refrained the Commission to move into that territory. But I believe that member states alone will not be capable to do the necessary steps in order to upgrade the distribution grid in a way that it will also serve the common European interest. And there I see also that the subsidiarity principle can be respected. So in a nutshell on this, I would say we need an integrated European energy market that is adapting to the new market and climate realities. And that we have not done so far. Now, just one word now, what can the Commission do with the NECPs if they fail to be good? Here, of course, it is a lot of talking, discussing, negotiating with the member states. I would not go straight into a kind of sanction systems where you might take out, as in other areas it was done, to say, and we cut you some financing here and there. I would not go down that road. I think these kind of things have to be done on a, let's say, on a common understanding and a common level of perception that, as it was said already, that there is no alternative to reaching our ultimate climate goal, because the costs of failure are so much higher than the cost that might now occur in doing these things that I have just mentioned and others to be done. So I would not do towards the member states a kind of bullishing and tapping on member states. It's more to try to convince them that there is no alternative and convince them that what they have put so far in the NECPs is not sufficient and they can do more. It is more the convincing way than the way of sanctions.
Thank you. I mean, this discussion has raised many avenues that we could pursue in the next hour. I'm just sort of hesitating, where should I start? Maybe here, taking from what Klaus-Dieter you said at the end about this methodology or method how to work with member states, because that makes me think of the work that we did together with Miguel and you on the so-called high-level groups, where focusing at the time on infrastructure, of course, where engaging with member states, with their system operators, their regulators, and then using this kind of a dynamics to bring member states on board. Not always successful. I'm looking at Christopher and Miguel on some of the interconnectors from the Iberia, but successful on others as well. So I think that is probably a good way forward there. So it is, of course, very, very resource intensive. But so Miguel, from your perspective, because you were the commissioner when we launched these high-level groups, be it in Central, Southeastern Europe or Southwestern Europe, Andris, you were there when the BEMIP was put forward in the Baltic region. So do you see this as the working method, or should there be something different? Miguel, maybe you start first.
Thank you. What I would frame the question in a more bigger picture, because one of the pieces of legislation more difficult for the Commission, and when I was member, to implement was the governance. The governance had difficulties within the Commission to make it sail through, and afterwards in the Council and in the Parliament. But in the end, I think we arrived to under the treaty competences to a governance who was quite strong. Sometimes we forget how is it working. Then I will come to the high level groups. For example, if you take the three targets, the energy efficiency, everybody understands that there is a moment very important now, because that is a policy we are lagging behind. Even the consumers' pattern have changed in an important way. Energy efficiency as a policy is not going as fast, the reduction of consumption, as it should go. And now we have the moment in which the draft updated NCP clearly indicate that there is a gap between the sum of the national targets and the European Union target. And then the Commission can react. The governor says, and as appropriate, that's a word I always be concerned, as appropriate, propose measures and exercise its power at union level in order to achieve the target. So there is a field for that, because we can achieve governance in a very diplomatic, polite way, or we take it seriously. If we take seriously, it is, we are not there, how can we be there? I think that on renewable energy, things are going faster and will be less problems, but on reduction of emissions, we are not there, because the current projection of member states suggests that a 48% reduction in net emissions will be reached by 2030 compared to 1990. And that's an increased ambition from the 41% they projected last year. But this will still leave a 7 percentage point gap to the 2030 target. And this has to be addressed very rapidly. Acting in the sectors where there is cost-effective potential to reduce greenhouse gases, which is transport and for sure buildings. No? So I think we have to, in this moment, to use the governance as we have it established in the regulations in a very constructive way. This is not a naming and shaming. It's that how can we together achieve our collective binding targets? So that's for one side. On the other side, my experience with the high-level groups was very positive. And was very positive because it created a network of relationship with the relevant ministers involved. They were becoming friends and trying to solve the problems together. That system works. We may have had problems in my own with the interconnections to the Pyrenees, but they were not easy. They were not easy, and you will remember we had to go to a submarine cable from the Gulf of Biscay to Aquitaine. Absolutely of enormous cost. Even the Commission supported it, and I think that it will sail through. But Spain will be in a level of interconnection less than 5%. We are not in the 10% or 15% that will require a market. But other groups, other high-level groups, make progress, whether when in interconnectors or reverse flows in gas pipelines, or whether we have to synchronize the Baltics with the European network. So that way of working through the high-level groups, I think, will be very positive. I think the next Commission will have the crucial role to take seriously all the targets and things we have on the table. The problem are not fishing targets. Targets are figures. The problem is the policies that have underlining those targets. And I think that at the moment, the next Commission will be extremely interesting. Some people say that the difficulties will be in the Council, others will be in the Parliament. But I love to go to trilogues. All of you know about me, and I think the next commissioners will be present in the next trials, because they will not be easy. They will not be easy. There will be a lot of politics. By the way, I was extremely sad that in the European elections in my country, nobody spoke about Europe. The turnout was less than 50%. So it was something we are doing wrong, so that the citizens are not following as closely as they do the topics we are handling, which are very important for the future.
Many thanks, Miguel. And yeah, I mean, looking at my own country, I'm not sure that it was good that Europe was on the agenda for the European elections, because we came more from the negative side, unfortunately. But it depends, I'm sure. But okay, Finnish election results was not the worst. It could have been in a way. Okay, Andris, what do you see from your experience?
No, my experience is definitely very positive on this high-level group, because Baltics will finish its synchronization now in February 2025, and its region has managed transition from oil and gas from Russia, completely phasing it out with major perturbation whatsoever. And it was because this high-level group encouraged some measures that worked very well. So I think it was really brilliant work done by all the involved. And it's also true that countries have been engaged. That's also true. But they have had a lot of political difficulties where to go and how to go. But this high-level group somehow straightened up. And I could make a bad example. We are now in all Baltic countries talking about Rail Baltic. Rail Baltica can't be, at least, well, it's still continuing and designed as a complete success. But it seems that they have been neither communication sufficient inside the countries, neither between three, and neither with Europe. Now everybody looks who is responsible. And then you say, well, everybody is responsible. So as a result, you can't even hang anybody. So that's where the difficulty is. So I believe it is definitely a strategy to follow, even if in some cases it will work not so good, but in many cases it will encourage developments that otherwise wouldn't work. So for me, it would be definitely next step after national energy climate plans, not just writing back, but really creating as much regional as possible, but where it's not possible, even the high-level group with national, it would make it definitely will improve situation enormously.
Thank you. Maybe then moving to a different topic that Klaus-Dieter raised earlier, which was on the energy-only market, and where you said that or questioned whether it would deliver the necessary investments. And we did write in one of our papers when the crisis, energy crisis, was at its height, saying that the capacity mechanisms should be a structural element of the market. And when we wrote it, I didn't think about that it was much more than a sentence. But then the feedback from the stakeholders was that this is big. So a big change in Commission policy, and that. So maybe I turn first to Christopher. Maybe from the analytical point, how do you see this? And then maybe after that to Miguel, because you were negotiating the clean energy package where this debate was at its peak. So also any insights from that negotiation? But maybe first, Christopher, how do you agree with Klaus-Dieter on this, first of all?
I do. Perhaps I can come at it a slightly different angle. So by 2040, if we are going to meet whatever target it is, our electricity system has to be zero carbon. Guess we all agree with that. Okay, number one. Okay, so in 2020, we had 32% renewable electricity. In 2024, 4 years later, we have 44%. So 12% increase, which is fantastic. Okay, 3% a year. So according to the Commission's modeling, to achieve the RED III targets, we need around 66%, something like that. okay? Which means another 18% in 6 years. So if we continue to increase capacity as we've increased until today, we'll not quite get there, but we'll be pretty close, okay? So if you think that repeating the mantra of congestion, grids, and the availability of, then there's three challenges. Huh? One is grids, which we've already talked about. One is having a system that actually balances demand, okay, where the Commission still continues this, oh, don't worry, we'll have renewable hydrogen. Okay, we'll balance it with renewable hydrogen. And third is, well, hang on a minute, we're also going to need a hell of a lot more electricity as well, okay? Because we all know that moving to 90%, 80%, whatever, means that electricity demand is going to have to increase very significantly for industry, moving from fossil fuel to electrification where possible, transport, moving away from fossil fuels to electricity in one form or another, and buildings, heat pumps. So demand is going to have to increase. So it's not just a question of renewable percentage has to increase, but the amount of renewable has to increase. So the Commission's approach on a technology-specific approach on we will use renewable hydrogen to balance this grid, it seems to me a little bit that this is a little bit wishful thinking. And so for all of these, and then the third one is an electricity system that's going to be cost-effective for industry, because a lot of our industry needs baseload, energy-intensive industry. And for those countries that don't have nuclear, that's going to be a huge challenge, but we're going back to the hydrogen. So it seems to me that the consequence of having, an electricity system based on a objective approach in terms of balancing this, and perhaps we can go about that, of what needs to be done in order to get that, have a realistic system, I think is absolutely important. So I'd fully agree with Dieter, if I've understood correctly what Dieter means. I've always been puzzled about what the term energy-only market means. So perhaps you could help us with that one as well.
But maybe I can explain that the energy-only market is that you are only concentrating on the generation. Okay. And that is what you are doing. And you have explained now with the figures where now the problem lays. We all need more renewable generation, but because it is intermittent, you have to open a second box. And Katharina is right. That was a big change in the latest electricity market design reform that the Commission has given up already in its proposal. The mantra that a capacity remuneration scheme is a measure of last resort. It has said it is an important element. And now you can, of course, discuss, is that what is written now in the law? Is that really not really too limiting the possibility to create these capacities? Don't we have to look whether we introduce there a kind of market structure, which also means, for instance, that the power plants that are in the instruments that are there, it's not only power plants, it is batteries, it's all kinds of things that have to go also into this market, that the question there is, how do you remunerate that? So that is the question around it. And as Chris has described the situation, if we are not capable to guarantee that at all moments in time we are capable to balance the system, then we get a real safety and resilience problem.
Thanks indeed. And from our assessments, indeed, what we see is that with the rapidly increasing amount of solar and wind, which indeed are not always available, we need to be sure then that we have the right systems, be it then backup capacity or be it demand response or batteries and all these things where technology has to play a big role as well in developing the new things. But Miguel, you were doing the trialogues on the clean energy package when this debate was really on the table, and the question of not having any coal obviously in the mix, and the fear that there would be too much gas in the mix. So any insight you may bring to us from those debates that took place?
If you remember, in the Clean Planet for All, we had an in-depth analysis, which I always recall the figures because we will have 80% renewables. There will be nuclear power. Nuclear power is a word you can never use in the Commission, but there was nuclear power, and there was a residual rest for F-gases and hydrogen and so on. What I have been in those years, I have not been the Commissioner, having followed developments, is that hydrogen was the silver bullet, and I have serious doubts that we can balance the grids with hydrogen in the future, because I think that the REPowerEU had to propose things very fast, and then figures were put on the table without so much analytical work done before. Because what's happening with hydrogen now? In 2022, hydrogen accounted for less than 2% of Europe's energy consumption. But 96% of this hydrogen was produced with natural gas. So let's see where we are. For sure, hydrogen, when generated through electrolysis, is a solution to decarbonize industrial process, and maybe a solution to store energy and balance the network. But I think that there are some figures that shouldn't have never been put on the table. Setting a target of 10 million tons of renewable hydrogen produced in Europe by 2030. This is difficult. But having additional imports of another 10 million tons from diverse sources is utterly difficult. And, amongst other things, because the total investment that the European Union will need to produce, to transport and to consume hydrogen in the EU are around 335, 475 billion. This is a huge investment in an area which you are a little bit in uncharted waters. And if you, at international level, you will need an additional 500 billion of investments to help establish a diversified value chains and enable the import of 10 million tons of renewable hydrogen. I think these figures are a little way aspirational. They can inspire work, they can be there so that we have ambition in the future. But my sensation is that we have gone very quick selling all the benefits of hydrogen, and we haven't explained all the difficulties, how we got gas pipelines adapt to them, how new different hydrogen lines should be run, and the 3 corridors the Commission has put on the table. It's a more complex thing. So we will have to think in traditional capacity markets, very well organized, with regional cooperation, and the Commission may have to have a look in depth to those mechanisms in the future.
Thanks. Many of you have mentioned hydrogen, indeed, and if we look at the binding targets that we have under the Renewables Directive for transport or industry, I mean, those add up to something like 6-7 million tons. So, you know, that is in a way the reality check that we got from the member states and the European Parliament in the negotiations on the Renewables Directive. Andris, you have been working quite a lot on hydrogen. What are your insights on this technology and how it fits the overall system, also in relation to energy system integration that has been also mentioned earlier?
Well, I am more for optimistic side, because if we see the carbonization of EU energy system, there are fuels, liquid fuels that you need to replace, and I see any other technology that you could do on this in time scale really to decarbonize maritime aviation, etc. You go to synthetic fuels, whatever it you have. As also mentioned, perhaps there is a good silver lining that our electricity demand is not growing as we expected. So perhaps it gives more capacities to produce renewable hydrogen. And on asset side, there is also quite a lot of work done by industry on hydrogen storages. Now there will be test facility where hydrogen will be injected in Germany. It is not far from Bremen by Uniper. There are some developments. The difficulty is that it's the storage installation takes a time, and that you need to do in anticipation, not post factum. And that, I think, is what needs to be discussed, because there is one particular aspect that we need really to be always very careful, and my colleagues have mentioned, it is this flexibility. If we see new Russian strategy in destroying energy infrastructure in Ukraine, they basically target now fossil fuel generation facilities that are able to balance the grid. So as a result, you can't use renewables, you curtail them partially, and also the same with nuclear. So they really has found the weak spot in energy system, and we should be very clear that definitely this flexibility and hydrogen, we need to know how much we can get there. So there is perhaps a ceiling that we can't. So we would need to have other solutions for it. But we are in a situation that I would say to be negative to hydrogen is definitely premature, at least in my opinion, because we have no other pathway. So if you have no pathway and you would like to say the goal, you unfortunately need to go in this way, and it is expensive, true, but let's see how to be more efficient and to spend less money on it.
Thank you. And I think we also see a positive future for hydrogen, maybe not as rapid as the 10 plus 10 million tons by 2030 and all of that renewable, but still quite some just few years after 2030, at least the expectations are quite there. But maybe starting with industry and transport and then seeing the rest. We haven't discussed yet money, and we have discussed a lot of elements that should form part of the future energy system, and investments cost money, and our estimations is that we would need something like 50 billion per year in the next decade in terms of investments. Of course, part of these investments are normal replacement investments that can then be need to be done in any case, so not all of it is a new investment per se. But how do you see the financing of this transition towards the new system, having more renewable electricity coming up, then hydrogen inevitably, CCS where needed, the whole balancing capacity mechanism system that we need, when at the same time the industry is looking for cheap electricity. Households are also complaining about costs, especially in the winter. So how do you see the financing of this transition that we need to do and we must do? So Klaus-Dieter, maybe I start with you.
Yes, the straightforward answer for me would be we need for the energy transition something like the introduction of Eurobonds, or a bit same kind as we did with regard to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Next Generation 2.0. But for me, that would be the straightforward, because it would be a European solution. It would also take care of the different fiscal possibility that member states have compared to each other. So that would be really a push from a financing push from the EU level. Unfortunately, I'm realistic here. I don't see that coming because you have too many member states, not only the frugal ones, the normal suspects like Germany, Netherlands, Denmark, and some others. I think it goes further. And here, the shift to the right wing in the member states will do another, because all the right-wing parties, they are not ready to use their taxpayers' money for financing something at EU level. So unfortunately, I think the situation is that these, be it Eurobonds or be it kind of next generation fund or transition fund, is, in my view, politically not achievable. So what remains? I think we could first look into the instruments that we have, and the most successful funding until now has come from the Innovation Fund. And here, I think one should maybe also reallocate the shares that goes from this fund into the energy transition, for instance. That would be a possibility. Clearly subscribe the conditions for which technologies I want to spend more, and those should be chosen that have the highest reduction value in CO2 terms. That would be one possibility, but that, of course, also would require that the carbon price is going up. For the moment, it stays too low. Another thing, and we have discussed or mentioned the dramatic situation of our grids, I would also see that more funds are needed in the Connecting Europe facility for electricity grids. And then the last thing that I would mention is the role of the European Investment Bank. I think a lot of projects, and we have just tackled a bit the hydrogen thing. And there what we see is that most of the projects, they are stuck. There's no final investment decision because the numbers are not there. The financing is not there. And so what the European Investment Bank could do beyond handing out loans, because that is not always the best or what the investors want, it's de-risking projects by guaranteeing, giving out guarantees, because that could be an incentive also for private investors. Because let us be clear, the public funding, EU level and national level, will never make it up. So therefore, what we really need to concentrate more on the private investments, and here introducing some de-risking guarantees for those projects, for me, could be also a very important element. But it has to be a toolbox of financing instruments. It cannot be the one and only. And unfortunately, as I said, the most efficient one, as we have seen in Next Generation or in Eurobonds, unfortunately, politically, they are not achievable.
Thanks. That's also our feeling that, when starting gradually now preparing for Commission proposal for the next budget that we will table sometime next summer, in 1 year time from now, that the stars are not aligned for a strong, high European budget. But to be seen. What you referred to in your suggestions is also the delivery method on how EU money is spent. And the two examples you gave, Innovation Fund and CEF, both are allocated based on call for proposals, so to the most meriting projects, contrary to then the more traditional, for instance, regional funds, where the funding is allocated to member states and who then determine, or even the recovery fund, which was allocated first to member states. So I would want to ask the other panelists here, how do you see this delivery method? Because I'm pretty sure that this will be a big discussion between member states in the council when the Commission's proposal will come out, or even before this. So maybe Miguel, what do you say about the funding and the politics of it?
I will try to say something that we haven't spoken about. We are now in the European Union in the middle of a very interesting exercise. The Council has asked the Letta report to be put on the table and see how we shape the internal market, the capital markets union. All those will be factors for the future. And we also will have on the table the Draghi report. It's very peculiar that the report is not on the table yet, but speech by speech, Mr. Draghi is shaping the ideas he has on these topics. And going through financing, what Mr. Draghi have said in the last speech he made in Spain, Mr. Draghi says that financing these various investments in climate energy will be a very significant challenge, and that we will have to rethink how we deploy both public and private capital. He points that there is significant scope for improvement simply through setting clearer priorities, streamlining regulation, and better coordinating different financial instruments, because we have many financial instruments, but maybe we don't have any coordination between the Innovation Fund, the CEF, the IEB, and so on, and the multi-annual financial programs. So that coordination, a better coordination, could improve the results of financing enormously. That what is absolutely clear is that even making public spending more effective will not be enough. And the financing needs for the green and digital transition are massive and with limited fiscal space in Europe, both at the national and so far also at European Union levels. Let's see, they may have discussion how do they go. Financing will have to be provided by the private sector, very clearly. So I agree with Klaus-Dieter. We'll also have to mobilize private savings on an unprecedented scale and far beyond what the banking sector can provide. And there, the main way to marshal the necessary funds will be by deepening our markets for risk capital. They are not very elaborated, different to the United States, equities and bonds. For sure, we would derive enormous benefits from some form of common financing at European level. But I am afraid that now, with the composition of the new parliament and the composition of the future council, because there are many pending European elections in the next year, coming back to something like Next Generation or the resilience facility would be very difficult, if not impossible. But we never had it, and we had it in the COVID. So let's see what happens.
Indeed, and we are certainly looking very much forward to seeing Mr. Draghi's report, which should be tabled, I think, in a couple of weeks at the maximum. So I'm sure there will be good ideas for us to also take forward and building on Letta's report. Christopher, any ideas for you how to bridge the financing gap?
I think the previous comment, there's a saying in English, the chickens are coming home to roost, meaning that all of a sudden you actually realize what the real problem is. And so let's just think about it, okay? So I just Googled it. There are 200 million buildings in Europe, okay? So let's assume you only need €1,000 to turn a building into a zero carbon one, okay? So that's 200 billion, okay? I've been an exercise to see if I can turn my house into a zero carbon, and trust me, 1,000 is not going to get you very far, okay? You're talking about 30, 40, whatever, 1,000, right? So you get from 200, so €1,000 per building is 200 billion, right? So you're quite quickly up into trillions, aren't you? By the time of how much will actually be needed, okay? And so then we'll talk about the network. There was a really interesting comment by Nikolai Stromkjar. Sorry, I massacred your name, apologies. Saying he works for a large TSO, and over the last 5 years, prices on transformer station sea cables have doubled or even tripled, but EU funding has not. Okay, So, okay, and then you think about industry, the amount of investment is going to be needed in order to decarbonize industry. Then agriculture, okay? And then so you really, so your 50 billion a year, probably, Katarina, is a huge underplay of how much will actually be needed. And I often get the impression that we use EU funding as a way to cloak the real problem. Because as I think the last speakers have said, EU funding is going to be a drop in the ocean compared to this. Absolute drop in the ocean. Even if, let's assume, okay, because, okay, the CEF is 5.6 billion. That will pay for the coffee for people to work on in the projects that are needed. Not much more than that. Okay, it's an exaggeration, of course. The ETS innovation, about 8 billion a year. Yeah, drop in the ocean. Even if the EU would agree a new COVID fund of 400 billion, say, over the next 10 years, still a drop in the ocean. And so the real answer is the emissions trading system. And the emissions trading system, which is now covering everything, which is great, covers industry, covers buildings, covers transport, covers the whole 9 yards. But the logic of that is that the ETS, putting the ETS on buildings is, mea culpa, my building where I live is still fed by fossil fuel. I have to do something about it. I'm trying, but okay. It means that the cost of fossil fuel for my building has to increase exponentially up to 2045, right? Which means that financing, as Miguel said, there's no amount of public money that is going to cover that cost of transforming all buildings in Europe. So Europe is going to have to accept that there will be social and industrial cost to this, which will require private funding. So there's the dichotomy, there's the problem. It means that the cost of fossil fuel has to increase to infinity by 2050, and financial investments have to come in. And the real question is, how do we get the financial investments and balance the social and industrial unrest that's going to happen by doing this, and get the investment in time to prevent that doesn't happen?
Thanks. A small challenge, I would say.
A little ray of sunshine from the House of Jones.
Thanks. And just a clarification on the CEF, we don't pay for their coffee, we only pay for the hardware. So at least we do something positive there. So Andris, do you agree with the more positive assessment or the more negative assessment from your co-panelists?
Well, I believe that Europe as a whole is in particular challenge, and what Miguel mentioned, Draghi report is something that needs to be looked upon, because whatever area will take, it's under the challenge. The global trade relations are strained, the developments are contradictory at least. So we are in completely new situation as a European. So the model we followed with free global trade, peaceful developments are over. So it is a wisdom a bit of member states how to deal with this. Here, the election results are not promising, because each country tries somehow to shelter what at least some parties that are getting power saying, we will be fine. Everybody else it's up to them. So there is this huge political issue, because at the end of the day, the ways forward are twofold. One is really to mobilize private financing, so capital market unions, risk capital, that is in a way there, but not too much to enthusiasm to really to go in this direction. And second is something similar. It is German scheme for hydrogen networks, guarantees that you guarantee, and it's also you attract private capital. So I like the scheme, because perhaps German taxpayers will need to pay very minimal for this really to advance. So the costs will be less than we would expect, but at the same time you could do the development. So it's really a challenge, but I would say if you don't mobilize, you will be short of what you are targeting, and yeah, that's definitely. I am on positive side. Always Europe, when it's in the corner, it strikes better than we expect. But at this stage, I should be also honest, not too many positive signs, because I expected more from EU budget. Now I would say this way is closed. I don't see that there will be really massive increase for support for green transition from Europe, and I always favored it because there is very limited budget means that has done miracles for protecting us during the energy crisis, interconnected member states, decreasing prices for consumers. So the costs have been minimal, but you should agree really to channel them, and that's where we are. So we are not advancing on it. But let's hope that in this general reconsideration, we will be better than people normally expect, but it would require some different approach to capital markets. That's for sure. If it is not done, then we are basically somewhere we will be in narrow passage.
Thanks. So a capital union or something like that could be proposed there. We have something like 15 minutes left of our time, so I will not ask a last question, but I will invite each of you to say whatever you didn't have the opportunity to say during the discussion, or any other topic you may want to raise. So I'll start by, well, maybe Klaus-Dieter. What did you want to say, but you didn't say it yet?
I think I would like to comment a bit on the political situation after the elections that was discussed at the beginning. I must say that I'm less worried when it comes to the European level, because the institutional system is such that there cannot be any overhaul of the legislation that has been put in place so far. And also new legislation always needs the initiative of the European Commission. And I do not see any moves in the political sense within the Commission. Although we have to see now how the new composition of the Commission will be, especially the commissioners that are coming from those countries that are under, let's say, a right-wing government. But I don't see a big problem there. In the parliament, yeah, we see ECR now has taken over Renew and takes the third place. But still, what the parliament can do is, in my view, something now. They can now really delay the installation of the new commission, because first they have to elect the commission's president. Then each individual commissioner has to go through a hearing in the committees, and as we know from the past, that is not an easy exercise. A number of candidates have been thrown out by the parliament, and this could be instrumentalized if the rights are really united. That is still something to be seen. For the moment, it's not the case. But when it comes to future legislation, we still have, with the EPP, with the Socialists, and also with the Greens and the Renew, we still have a bloc that can make the difference. And therefore, at the EU level, as I said, yeah, it is challenging. To forge majorities in the parliament is more difficult than before, but it is doable. My fear is more at the national level. And here I'm looking especially to France. If the upcoming elections really give the results that we all might expect, at least that I expect, that will be a real game changer. Also in the council and in the way, of course, the future policy shaping at EU level is done. And if we imagine for a second that we have France, we have Italy already, France maybe clearly, Miguel, I don't know how you see the situation in Spain, but that is also always a shaky country when it comes to the route. We have Germany that we will see how that goes. That is really worrying because there you have not only tendencies where we are talking about how we best shape the European policies for the benefit of all Europeans. Here we have a more, let's say, profound discussion of what should the EU stand for. And that is my big fear, that from the ground, from the member states' ground, something can grow up that might even put into jeopardy the fantastic idea to have a united Europe.
Thanks. Indeed, we hear from more and more countries this slogan that, my country first, and that is, looking at only my country benefits and forgetting that there are common benefits across the EU. Indeed, thanks. Miguel, do you want to react from your perspective?
No, I fully agree with Klaus-Dieter. This is going to be a different council and a different parliament from the past. Quite different, no? Always in the European institutions, you reach agreement eventually. The problem is what kind of agreement. I am very proud of being European when I see that in this debate of climate change, Europe is clearly the leader. We have the most ambitious targets. I always say that even more ambitious of the targets that the IPCC keeps recommending. So it's very clear. We have another very positive thing, which is we have all the regulations in place in order that our policies are acted regardless of political changes in countries. Because countries say, well, government can change, but the regulations are there, the directives are there, and that stabilizes the whole political world. For sure, the Commission is going to play, again, as not only proposing leaders, but an honest broker to bring it over. The efforts in this Commission have nothing to do with previous commissioners, no? So, but it's clear that it will be a very different political situation. And at the same time, this situation comes at a moment in which the report letter coming from the Council established lots of homework to be done without meddling in things not so important. And probably the Draghi report, if we want to have competitiveness all over Europe, will have to be followed and introduce many changes. Europe is built slowly but surely, So I'm always optimistic in the outcome, but in the way to the final outcome, we are going to be for more surprises. For sure, we say in Spain, in politics, the seat teach you a lot. The politicians who are absolutely radical in their own countries, they come to Brussels or Strasbourg or Luxembourg, and that's a different speech. So it will be very important, the figure of the president of the council. It will be extremely important because the situation is radically different, and the president of the council should be somebody of high political stature, capable of solving the problems that many other colleagues will put on the table. So I will follow very closely who will be the president. For sure, the election of the president of this commission will be as difficult, at least, as the past one. Remember, she went through with 9 votes. And now the panorama is very artistic, I would say.
Thank you, indeed, and thank you for the optimism on the European way of working, which I fully share. Then, Andris, what would you want to say before we close that you didn't have the opportunity to say? You can comment anything we have been discussing today.
Yeah, it's very interesting debate, and it's a lot of interesting questions. I will focus on one that I believe is rather of crucial importance. It is this discussion about carbon lock-in towards zero. And I would say, yeah, there is a risk, but there is a risk globally with carbon flows. If all the world would move with the same step, then will be one situation. If the world is moving in with different steps, then we need really to be credible to ourselves, to voters, and also to the targets we make. So that's why technological neutrality is a key to achieve this zero target. I know that some could be criticizing it, but it is criticizing then not to do anything. So that's the same critics that you get from other side. The people are saying, well, others are not doing anything, we should not do anything. So you get the same criticism. And I believe that technological neutrality, and it leads to CCS. It's not the ideal source, but that's definitely something that we need really to achieve the target and really to lead to business cases. I know that we could always criticize fossil fuel industry, but we would need that they also invest. So we need these investments because they have a money and they need to participate in the process. Just saying that they are bad will not change the whole thing. So that's why I would say it's legitimate debate on carbon lock-in, but we need really to see that we have limited time to achieve carbon neutrality in Europe and also globally. So we need to do what is more efficient and what is available now. And then the other is the issue of citizen and prices. That I think is also a very interesting question. It is, we definitely need broad support of the people. And it's true that some of the schemes that have been supported promotion of new technologies, particularly green vehicles or electric vehicles, have not been the most successful. Also transition in homes. So we need to find a formula that people are feeling that actually this transition will lead them. They will have more security, better prices, and for the ones that are really in difficulties, there could be a check of transitions. There could be a ways how really to get the people in, that they feel that they are not forgotten in the whole transition, and it's particularly in incentive schemes. So I believe that is the issue, but we are moving on it, and a lot of member countries have already panels established discussing how to avoid, first of all, mistakes, because then they are more difficult to correct. But second, really to support the ones that need this support, really to be felt not forgotten in the whole transition, and that is doable.
Thank you. And then, Christopher, you have the last word to say whatever you want to comment or anything before. Then, if time allows, I will conclude.
Thank you, Katarina. Well, I'm worried we're at a tipping point on climate change and energy policy, and that our current policy is a bit like the solution that I've just devised for the crack in the wall in my spare bedroom, which is I'm going to wallpaper over it and ignore it. Because for the following, I'm really worried that if we continue the approach that we have today, it's going to end up with increasing social unrest, economic decline, and a failure to meet the targets. So what I would like to see in the next commission is a real, honest, fact-based, integrated approach of saying, how are we really going to get to zero carbon in 2050? Not just putting some targets up and some modeling, but ask the real question. So how are we really going to do it in electricity? What are the real challenges, and how are we going to invest them on a fact base year by year? How are we going to do this? What's it going to cost? Who's going to pay it? Same thing for industry. In order to be zero carbon in 26 years, all of our industry is going to have to be zero carbon. Now, if you continue with the ETS and the CBAM is an imperfect instrument, which means we will have industrial decline and we will lose jobs. So how are we going to address this? Buildings. You know, we're kind of blinkered. We're failing to address the real problems of how are we really going to do this in 26 years, decarbonize all these buildings, and have a real frank and honest assessment. Same thing with agriculture and negative emissions. Negative emissions, the Commission says in the Industrial Carbon Management Strategy, we'll need 400 million tons negative emissions a year. At 150 to 500 euros a ton. €500 a ton means 200 billion subsidies a year. Who are you going to get to pay for negative emissions? So, and also on trade, a really honest assessment on trade, because we've been, we all know the story. We've been the best at providing subsidies and the worst at building PV panels. So I would like to see a real, true and honest discussion of how are we really going to get there? Because if we don't, in another 5 or 6 years, we'll find we're not going to be able to do it. And that would be the worst thing.
Many thanks. Many thanks, all of you. I think we can take a couple of minutes over time, so I will conclude. So first of all, many thanks for the super interesting and insightful discussion. I think we could have easily continued for a couple of hours, and there were a number of questions I wanted to continue or ask you, but there was not an opportunity today. So some takeaways, which are of course very personal, so no commission line, official line at this point of time. Well, on the first one, I think we can all agree, and Commission agrees, is that reaching decarbonization, reaching the carbon neutrality is a must. So there is no question on this. We need to get to 2030 and 2040. And this is then requires monitoring, so working along with member states to see where they are at almost each point of time, and also helping them identify different ways of doing. And here, the implementation of the Fit for 55 package, which is enormous in terms of progress and measures, is a key priority. And that is certainly a message that we are passing from the services side to the upcoming Commission, that implementation is priority 1. And here maybe Miguel and Andris, you could tell the upcoming commissioners that the trialogues are not that interesting. Actually, implementation is much more interesting for politicians. So on that. But we are in front of a real paradigm shift. I mean, the decarbonization of our economy is a paradigm shift. It's not moving continuously on a trend. So really requires new ways of working, new technologies. We touched upon just briefly hydrogen and CCS, but I mean, we need to look at much more than this. And the whole question of how to integrate all these different technologies on a systemic way, I think is the only way forward. Otherwise, the cost will explode, and we really need to build on the different sectors and also see how the fossil industry can mobilize their capital in greening the industry. We touched upon the question of subsidiarity, and especially in the context of the distribution local level. And I think that is certainly something that we need to look into in terms of the governance and how to work with the member states and the local players on this. And indeed, there is work ongoing here. And I think the angle to the subsidiarity is that if the bottlenecks at the local level, as we see them, actually slow down or even hamper the decarbonization, then it's not anymore a question of subsidiarity, it's a European question. So that's a little bit the logic from where we come from. I also personally agree very much with the need to be transparent, to be honest, and to tell the citizens where we are, and telling them also that some of these things will cost. In the short term, especially, maybe in the long term, we can really bring the cost down. And here, I would not have imagined that I would ever say this, but I do miss the impact assessments that we used to do before the crisis, when we had the time and were obliged to do them before the crisis. During the crisis, we didn't do impact assessments, but I think we really need to do that. Go through all the data, all the analysis, really looking at costs, benefits, where they occur, and all this. And I really hope that we have the time now to do this solid analytical work underpinning then future policies. And here, what I often say, maybe because I come from a small member state, that we also have to keep in mind that Europe is very diverse, and that's in a way our strength. and one size fits all does not work. So we need to take into account the specificities of our member states, different energy mixes, different electricity mixes, different natural resources, and then design the policies so that they fit all different contexts. And here I think the working method, working together, governance, high-level groups, working with on the ground with the players, member states, ministries, ministers, system operators, regulators, and all this is of crucial importance, because we are all in the same boat and we need to really work together. We don't have any time to waste. And then my last comment is that we hopefully Commission is courageous enough to make a very ambitious proposal for the next budget along the lines we discussed here, even despite the political realities, because of course, if we make an ambitious budget proposal, it gives a starting point, and then, as Miguel said, we always find a compromise somewhere. So, and then we will see from there. So that's from my rapid takeaways. But I think the discussion was really much more rich than what I could take away, and indeed would have been fantastic to continue a couple of more hours. But I'm sure we will come back to such discussions in the future. So million thanks to the panelists. You were brilliant. I learned a lot, as always, when I speak with each of you. It was a great pleasure, and hope to see you all very soon again. And many thanks for the questions. We have some of them we are trying to answer in parallel also in the chat box. So many thanks for the audience for engaging with us and asking those questions. So many thanks to all of you. I wish you a very nice day and an excellent weekend, and see you very soon again.
And thank you for the brilliant moderation, Katarina.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Katarina.
Katarina.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.